Good morning. So glad that you all came. It's great that so many countries are coming and are interested in the EUPC. I tried to explain why we did all that and what's the rationale of this whole strategy of the EUPC. You might know that nowadays, everybody talks about the Icelandic approach, isn't it? It's in all newspapers, translated everywhere, and even in Dutch newspapers, now in the Spanish and Portuguese newspapers as well. But what is actually special in it? Nothing. It is just the concrete, strict application of some principles of environmental prevention. To have a committed alcohol policy, so you can see that in most countries of Europe this would be difficult already. Look at Germany. They promote parental monitoring to all parents. They encourage them to have dinners with the kids in the evening, and they have this education policy where in the afternoon everybody has supervised leisure time. That's basically one of the other principles of environmental prevention. And they have strong social norms, and they do not invest in any of these classical things that people associate with prevention, like persuasion, awareness campaigns, warning, and so on and so forth. It's very simple. They just did it. And there are more good news. In Australia, they have now banned all ex-addicts in schools. The typical thing that many countries do, that they bring ex-drug addicts into schools to talk about their experiences and scare them off, because they realize it doesn't work, it has negative effects, so it's banned. So this all happens if somebody has the guts to apply rigorously evidence-based principles. And if they do not, then we have the classical information-based approaches. Only, these are the maps I have always in all my presentations. The darker map, the more something is being done. To provide only information on drugs. To have information days once a day. It's very cost-effective for schools. You can say you have done something, but zero effect. Or visits of law enforcement in school, also a very popular thing to do. While empirically, we all know huge studies from all over the world showing that substance users have more health literacy than non-users. So why all the thing with the investment in information? It doesn't have any translation into behavior, or the opposite. But also in nightlife, the single most important approach in nightlife settings is just information provision. These leaflets they give to everybody, as if this would change behavior. And then it gets worse. This is 2018. The Czechs have just managed more or less to ban the revolution train, and now it's being bought by 2 German states. The revolution train is kind of the classical, silly prevention intervention from the 70s. It is just mocked up a little bit with a little more fun, and it's sensorial experiences, as they say. You get handcuffed into a train to see how it is to be arrested by the police, and then you have a feeling how it is if you get drugs. And that's why they say it's innovative. So the Czechs have basically almost get rid of it, and now 2 German states are buying the garbage of the Czech Republic, Thüringen and Bavaria, and people are really upset because professionals say, what the hell? But policymakers at the mid-level, at state level, want this very much. And it even made it on the website of the National German Federal Drug Coordinator. I mean, she's not very smart, but nevertheless, this is a very hard thing to do. To put it on the website of the government and to say this is a noteworthy project. They don't say that it's effective, but it's noteworthy. And one key thing that came out when discussing this, people say in the ground, this is great because finally we see that something is being done. Because they do not understand, or we do not communicate it properly, that prevention, if it's well done, should be invisible. People should not realize that there is a preventive effect, otherwise they might feel manipulated. So it is nice that people don't see prevention. But these kind of things, again, having a hype as the extreme right is having in Europe. And not what can we do? There are 2 options. One, we can do more of the evidence-based programs. This is already stated in the EU minimal quality standards in the Council conclusion from 2015 that member states should have more evidence-based programs. This is the key word in the declaration of the European Council. Right, there are registries of programs in several countries. We have on our website our exchange prevention registry where all the programs that can or might work in Europe are listed with their level of effectiveness, and you see below how many countries have implemented them and which were the experiences. Right, but the point is, in many countries, manualized programs are not important. They are important in Spain, Portugal, the Netherlands, Poland, Germany, and Lithuania. But other countries have traditionally never invested in them, like France never did, now they're doing a bit more, but Finland, Norway, never. So this approach I've just mentioned works in maybe half of the countries. For the other half, they do invest more in things like local environmental policies, a little bit following or direction towards the Icelandic approach, to have a combination of several approaches that you can run out at municipal level. And so you see that France is there much stronger, for instance, Finland and the Nordic countries are very strong in that sense. And this is kind of focusing on nightlife, focusing on simple things like conditional licensing of alcohol outlets, of opening hours, local regulations. And this is also effective. The point is, in order to do that, you need very well-trained professionals. You can't leave that to someone or to anyone. You need people to know what are the principles of science-based prevention. And this is now the second option, or the second need. You need a workforce who knows what are the principles of evidence-based prevention in order to be able to do non-manualized interventions, not the classical programs. And this has also been foreseen by the European Council. This is the original wording. The key words are people are trained, specialized. So the reason is they get training, accreditation. That's why we hold this thing in Prague also, because this is the country, the only country in the world where somebody has done an accreditation system of professionals. You cannot, with the reason you cannot get in touch with our kids unless you have at least 200 hours of training. And this is a very important message to say. Prevention can be harmful. You don't let every idiot get in touch with your kid. They need to be trained. You don't let any guy treat your child in pediatrics. They need to be training. So prevention can be harmful. And it's also the work for accredited or recognized institutions. I mean, there are more competition between the prevention providers. Not that just anybody who did it for the last 30 years or Scientology can do prevention only because it pleases them. You need kind of a competition among them. But there are challenges, because whenever I go through Europe, I often get, in whatever speech I give, this kind of statements from professionals. When I talk about regulation, they confuse it with prohibition. When I talk about social norms, they call me a fascist. When I talk about the need for evaluation, in Austria they say, what, that's totally unnecessary, we know it works. And then that's the evidence. What evidence? It doesn't exist, so we are free to do what we want. Talk about environmental prevention, they say you're manipulating people. And these are all kind of the narratives that professionals have, so somebody has to do something about that as well. And this is why, for this particular situation in Europe, we have changed, and Pierre will talk about this much better later on, we have added or changed 3 particular parts of the original curriculum. We have added more on environmental prevention because Europe is particularly weak in that. We have little regulation compared to the rest of the world, even compared, let's say, to Latin America. We might have legalization on the doorstep, so we might need more of that. And the whole nightlife intervention, because nightlife is extremely important. Spain, for instance, has the second biggest nightlife industry in the world. And I think Prague lives also a lot of Anglo-Saxon drinkers coming here, let's say. And what we do, as I just said, it's full of outdated interventions in nightlife. It's all about leaflets and personalized advice. Personalized advice is okay, but you can't cover everybody with it. And advocacy. Because we have, contrary to the United States, where the EUPC comes from, we have less these bottom-up communitarian approaches to prevention. It's decided by policymakers, and often they act against better knowledge. I come to that later. Now, to make it very simple, what needs to change in the contents of prevention? The functions means what are the pillars of prevention, what are the contents of prevention, let's say. Because we have three determinants of our behavior. All our behavior is steered by these three components: our motivation, our capability, and our opportunity for action and for behavior. And based on these three determinants of human behavior, you can decline, and you have kind of three pillars: the education pillar, which is prevention education, the campaign, and the drugs education in a narrow sense, or you have the capacitation, which is the skills training. The skills training is basically done in manualized programs, like Unplugged, and programs that simply train personal skills, self-control, and so on. And then you have the third pillar, which is about opportunities, the nudging thing, the environmental thing. And this is normally rather done in local environmental strategies, beside from big national policy. But the simple message is we have to reduce spending so much on information. We have to keep and roll out the whole capacitation things, and we have to roll out much more the whole part on the nudging and environmental strategies. That's the point. And that's why we have to roll out this piece, we need better trained professionals. Let's go, why the environmental prevention? Because human behavior is not based on cognitive processes, only to a small extent. We need to take into account much of what we do, let's say our eating behavior, is based on automatic decision making. We act automatically, afterwards we justify rationalizing what we have just done, basically by lying. And we have a lack of self-control and a lack of introspection. We do often not know why we did something. For instance, the control thing, we know that self-control under cold conditions increases over our lifespan. We are more and more able to control ourselves in cold situations. Cold situations are when we are alone and we can think. But there is the hot situations. In hot situations, it is known that self-control has a deep bump during adolescence. Basically, it's not there. When you put young people in a hot situation of rhythm, music, eroticism, beauty, whatever, there is no more self-control. They might know a lot about risk, but all this is thrown overboard in hot situations. So that's one limit. That's why what prevention people finally need to learn more is that you don't only focus on individual decision making. Much of our behavior is steered by the environment. This is the definition, our EMCDDA definition in a recent paper about environmental prevention. To reduce the visibility, accessibility, and perception of normality and acceptance. Finally, the new Spanish strategy puts this exactly as their new objectives. It's the only country what I have read before. It's about visibility, accessibility. And this targets the automatic system of behavior, where you don't need cognition, thinking, self-control. It goes automatically. It means, one agency means basically all the resources that I have to put into in order to steer my behavior. Agency means I sit the whole day with a chocolate bar in front of me and say, I don't eat it, I don't eat it, I don't eat it. Less agency is, the chocolate bar is hidden below the desk of my boss. I'll never go there, so there is no temptation to eat the chocolate bar. This is basically the principles of agency. Let's say the alcohol industry bases all their strategies on agency. People are responsible to be moderate. Yes, alcohol is good, but people have to know how to use it. So it's not our problem. This is agency. People, you have to control yourself. Effective prevention steers the environment in a way that people don't have to control themselves. There is simply less urge or less pressure or less stimuli to use. And this is our model of environmental prevention. By regular economic and physical measures, you steer not only behavior directly, but the essential part is you change behavioral norms, beliefs, and values. It was because of smoking restrictions that people changed their smoking behavior. It was clear since 30 years that smoking is a problem and its damages to health. Never anybody changed behavior. But by changing the possibility to smoke Smokers are now confined into boxes in airports, like a consumption room in any other cities. There are alcohol consumption rooms and tobacco consumption rooms. And now the glamorous aspect of smoking has declined. So it has changed the social norm. It changed social norms by changing the possibilities of behavior. Nightlife. What is nightlife in Europe? Basically, that's Mallorca, Magaluf, a notorious place, and there's still the British booze industry, or the British tourist industry is very happy because they have still not banned all-inclusive booze. Basically, you pay at the entrance a fixed fee and you can drink as much as you want for the rest of the night. It's not being banned in certain locations, in Spain, for instance, and this is very European. And then again, two independent studies, one European, many countries, and one from California, looking at what are the determinants of drug use in nightlife settings. Look at this. This is all environmental factors. And if you look at them, this explains well the problem of affordances. Imagine you're in this kind of place. It's full of people, ugly, drunk men. The classes are big. You can't flirt, you can't talk, you cannot sit, you cannot have something to eat, you cannot put down your glass. Contrary to a place where you can do all that. You can sit, put your glass down, doses are smaller, you can have something to eat, and you can flirt. You have completely different drinking behavior in these places. And you will not realize if people ask you afterwards in a qualitative research why, you will probably not know why you drink less. But this is affordances. But what we do, most people in nightlife say, well, people just don't know how to use properly. That's why they're using. People ignore completely the true determinants of our substance use behavior in nightlife settings. And they claim that risk reduction would be different from prevention. There's this whole ideological thing. And if it is not different, it's the same. That's why we have a website where we compile all interventions in nightlife, and they're evidence-based. And there are also one thing that stands out, which are these multi-component programs, like the START intervention in Stockholm, which is an environmental intervention again. But they are not very frequent. You see, they are limited, rare in most of the countries. Only the English and Finnish are investing more in that. The only thing that's effective in nightlife, the most effective in nightlife, are these multi-component regulatory approaches. But they are not much done. That's why we need more training. Advocacy is very important, and we added a chapter that did not even exist in the original manual of the EUPC. Why? Because there's the policymaker's dilemma. It's not always lack of knowledge. They know, some of them, that what are evidence-based interventions, but they are not visible. Social influence programs, school climate, parenting, these things should be done. They know that often. People tell me, my policymaker knows that. He just doesn't care because he needs political capital. He needs to do something which is easy to produce, easy to disseminate, and which has high political capital. That's the recipe of why people buying again the revolution train, because they can show that something is happening. That's why they do all of that nonsense on the left, because it shows that they are doing something, even if it's guaranteed that it will not work. So in the face of policymakers who act against better knowledge, we need to mobilize civil society. One nice example, which made it into UNODC, big conference, is Feria. Feria mobilizes parents' associations in Spain. They are there, and they train them in advocacy so that they can go in Spain, which is probably a very particular and problematic country, so that all the mayors that are kind of held hostage by the alcohol industry get pressure from parents' group. We are your constituency, your electorate, so you stop with all these industry-promoted practices like drinking competitions. You get a prize, who had more drinks within half an hour, and so on, in the local parties. So they train them in how to do advocacy, how to do information sharing, and they make pressure on local decision makers. And a very nice thing came up in a conference the other day in Geneva, where some French lady, but that's a very French thing to say, said, Is it possible to make a citizen revolution in prevention? That the citizens say something, we want something different. And that's, I think, for alcohol policy, that could be something to do, kind of something to say, how can citizens stand up to protect the kids from irresponsible policymakers? That's what I was suggesting to the people from Thüringen, where the bosses, the national state coordinator, wants to buy the revolution train, and where the local prevention centers and don't want it, make a campaign, say this is irresponsible, protect our kids from irresponsible from prevention decision makers. Make a Twitter campaign, make something very heavy, do advocacy. So especially in Europe, people need more, the ground people, or the population, or civil society, or illustrated NGOs need a strategy of how to make a revolution. Because a very nice paper came out this week. In fact, we always focus on the end client, of people that have to change their behavior, as the alcohol industry says. But after all, whose behavior has really to change? It has to, as Victor said at the beginning, it has to change the behavior of the policymakers. It's not the individual fault that there is substance use or excessive substance abuse, how you might call it. It's basically due to bad decision making at regional and local level. And it's complex, yes, but it's a classical argument. And remember that it's a classical argument by the alcohol industry. They always say, it's a complex issue. Unless we do everything, it cannot be properly addressed. Yeah, but this is not an argument for not doing nothing, because what the alcohol industry proposes is mostly very simplistic information campaigns. And therefore, this whole EUPC, and Pierre will explain it better, focus basically for people at local level. We know that the big strategic decision making is made at national level. UNODC is targeting these people with a special training program based on the EUPC. We here in Europe, we need to focus on those people who have the money, because that's often at regional level. In Poland, in Spain, also in France, it's a local level. They decide what to do at the municipality, but they don't have much knowledge on what exactly. And that's the old doctrine of Silly Sloboda, who couldn't come because of a knife storm. She said it doesn't make sense to train the frontline professionals if their bosses do not know why and what are the contents. If not, they will block it all out. Maybe that was a problem we have been doing, that we trained the frontline professionals without training the bosses first. And because they consider them already experts, because they have no time, we needed a very short curriculum. That's why we reduced the original 9 weeks training of the original UPC into 5 days. That maybe some people at that level might want to attend. That's why we call them DOPS, Decision, Opinion and Policy Makers. And this is just from a nice paper by Jonathan Sharpless. How do you bring evidence into practice? You have the evidence producers, it might be the people, half of the people sitting here. The other half might be the evidence synthesizers, the universities, people that put it into chewable pieces, but we need to target here the transformers, the bodies, the policy organizations, the NGO and the local government. Kind of their behavior needs to change. This is our strategic goal for putting the EUPC in place. And that's why we need a training system, and that's why we're going to work after this academy and after this project in other projects like Hede will present it, to connect it to European quality standards. We need to foster the political will to really use these standards in practice, which is not really convincingly applied yet. And what people say more and more, and this will be also one of the parts of our EMCDDA program, how to de-implement the old crap. How to get rid of things that we shouldn't do anymore. Substitute with better things. Offer them something better. And also we need financial structures to reflect this. Conditional financing, quality criteria, and I think people trained by UPC might think more benevolently about these kind of approaches that I'm just saying. And also what came out, peer and normative pressure among professionals, I'm saying. Karl May made a very nice systematic review of what actually are the drivers of professional behavior and how they change I mean, professional in healthcare generally. And what they say is basically what works best is not only training them and informing them of what is better. The same things that work for changing substance use behavior work also for professionals. Normative restructuring of practice, modifying peer groups. So there are things that give us clues for the future of EUPC, that professionals form kind of a body. EUPC trained professionals have a certain standard of practice. And this should be mutually reinforced by peer group norms and so on. And maybe for the future of e-learning interventions, where people can see what others are doing and thinking, and if they have ingrained and absorbed the learning, these kind of things might be important to change actually professional behavior. So that's the point. One of the people yesterday said is you cannot always wait that things happen by providing the tools. You must actively do something so that professionals' behavior changes. I'm finished here.